The junior clerk had stopped pretending to work, and so had everyone else on the registry floor, because the public record wall was filling top to bottom with a single motion crawling up in 4 scripts at once, and the motion was the end of the frontier. He watched it climb, the Accord's retrenchment motion, the consensus to decertify the frontier arcs, withdraw the inquiry, pull the powers back behind the old walls, and let the changing dark have the edge of the map. And he watched the whole quiet hall arrange itself around the fact of it, the way a room arranges itself around a death. Then the doors opened, and the tall junior officer with the off-fit uniform walked in, the one the Tcharn had named, and the clerk thought, if anyone is going to stand in front of that, it is her, and she is going to lose. Rosa read the motion twice, the way she read everything, and then she went and found her supervisor because she needed to know how much time she had before the thing on the wall became law. Reyes was in his office with the slate he carried everywhere, and the careful, tired expression of a man who had already done the arithmetic.
Before you say anything,
He said,
yes, it's real, and no, there is nothing on your bench or mine that reaches up into Accord consensus. The court, the houses, United Earth, the authority, they all agreed on the one thing they're best at agreeing on, which is to not look at the thing they're afraid of. The clock at the center is failing, nobody can fix it, so the Accord is going to do what it did to the Vask 300 years ago. It's going to decide the safe thing is to pull back and let the people at the edge fall off the map. The motion finalizes in 2 days.
And we abandon Coreward, the station-born, the Vask routes, every contractor and ally who lives where the clock is loudest.
We call it consolidation, but yes.
he set the slate down, which he did not often do.
I taught you, your first week, that the instrument doesn't care what you meant it for, only what it says. You've used that line against me 4 times. If you've got a 5th officer, this is the docket for it. Because I have read every procedure the Reach owns, and there is no clause that makes an Accord be brave.
She spent the first day reading because that was how she found doors. She read the retrenchment motion until she understood the shape of the Accord's fear, and the shape was the same shape it had always been. The Accord moved only by consensus in citing precedent, and it had no precedent for acting into a thing it could not resolve. So faced with the unresolvable, it did the only lawful thing it knew, which was to withdraw. To act, all of them would have to agree to look at the clock and admit they could not fix it, and no power in the Accord would ever stand up in a chamber and admit it was afraid of something it could not explain. That was the wall, not malice, cowardice with a procedure. And Rosa had spent 2 years learning that you did not break a wall like that by asking the Accord to be brave. You found the door that was already in it. She had built one before. The recognition procedure, the door for the dispossessed, the one the Accord had tried to strike for being true and tried to legislate shut, and finally could not touch, because a Tcharn Court senior had ratified it into the court's own naming grammar, beyond the Accord's reach. It was Tcharn procedural law now. It did not need consensus. It needed only a party of record to invoke it. She was a party of record. The court had named her, and the door she had built for the Vask dead was, she realized on the first night, exactly the wrong size and exactly the right shape for what she needed now. What she built in one night and most of a day was the thing she would spend the rest of her life being. She took the ratified door, the dispossessed recognition standing that lived in the Tcharn naming grammar, outside Accord consensus, and she widened it. The original door let a failed people enter the record as not property. The new instrument let any party of Accord record commit resources to the frontier on the standing of a thing the Accord could not strike, not on consensus, not on an admission, but on the cross-readable truth that the frontier peoples now held knowledge the Accord needed, because they did. Hari Rao had come back from the Vask keels with the only long history of the silences that existed. Yara Haddad had a recording of the center answering a human at the threshold. Soren Cade had a chorus of the deep ones keeping the failing clock. The frontier the Accord wanted to abandon was the only place the answers were, and the people the Accord wanted to leave behind were the only ones who held them. So Rosa built the Accord a way to act that let it keep its dignity. The powers would not have to stand in a chamber and admit they were afraid. They would only have to invoke an instrument that committed them to the frontier on the grounds that the frontier was now indispensable to them, which was true and cross-readable, and could not be struck for being true, and required no consensus, only a party of record willing to file it, and a court willing to ratify it under the grammar that was already beyond the Accord's reach. It was exactly the slight and authority officer named Solheim had used to turn a closure into an inquiry, scaled up to the size of a galaxy, misuse the machine against its own cowardice, give the Accord a door it could walk through while still telling itself it had not moved. She brought it to Reyes before she brought it to anyone, because Reyes was the best wall she knew, and a door that could not survive him would not survive the court.
Walk me through it as though I want to strike it.
He said, which was how he read everything.
Because someone will.
You can't strike it for lacking consensus because it doesn't claim consensus. It isn't an Accord instrument. It's a Tcharn naming grammar instrument ratified by a court senior, and the Accord's writ doesn't reach into the court's grammar. You taught me that the week the court named me.
Then I strike it for overreach. A junior liaison officer does not get to commit the Accord's resources.
I'm not committing them. The instrument doesn't order anyone to do anything. It records a finding the Accord can't deny, that the frontier holds knowledge the Accord needs and attaches a standing obligation to it. The Accord commits itself by walking through, because the alternative is standing up in a chamber and saying out loud that it would rather not know. No power in the Accord will say that out loud. That's the whole mechanism. I'm not making them brave. I'm making cowardice cost more than courage.
Reyes was quiet a moment, doing the arithmetic he always did, looking for the failure mode.
The grounds. The whole thing stands on the frontier being indispensable. If the grounds are soft, the door is a picture of a door. Where do the grounds come from?
That's the part I can't build. I can build the door. I can't build the proof that the frontier matters. For that, I need the one person who spent a year refusing to let the proof be filed and forgotten.
She did not build it alone either, and she was careful to say so on the record. The grounds, the proof that the frontier was indispensable, were not hers. They belonged to an authority oversight officer who had spent a year refusing to let a folder of frontier oddities be filed and forgotten. Renata Solheim came to the annex with the whole inquiry in her slate, every measured finding, every recording, and laid it down as the cross-readable substance the instrument stood on.
I opened a file the authority wanted closed, and I have spent a year being the officer whose name is on it.
Renata said, setting the slate between them.
Everything in it is measured, and none of it is deniable, and all of it says the same thing your instrument needs it to say. The answers are out there. The people who hold them are the ones the Accord wants to leave behind, and you cannot withdraw from the one place the thing you are afraid of is actually speaking. I could not make anyone act on it. You found the door it walks through. Use my file. That is what it was for.
She could not do it alone, and that was the last thing she understood, the thing that closed the loop she had carried for 2 years. The instrument needed a party the Accord could read on every side. She was a Tcharn named party. That was one side. She was a declared Vask witness, held by the Marak hold trade-clade for life. That was another. To invoke the instrument, she had to be, herself, the cross-readable object, a human both the court and the Vask would read as standing. The bridge two alien powers could meet across without either entering the Accord they refused or the consensus they feared. So she called the witnesses she had spent 2 years earning. Tav of Marak Hold came present without registry a 5th time, the way the Vask always came when the record of their dead was in question, refusing the Accord's register even as she arrived to be used by it, which was the whole Vask position in a single act. She crossed the registry floor in the welded plate of the Marak Hold trade-clade, the 4 memorial tokens lashed at her harness, and the hall that had been arranging itself around a death rearranged itself around her. She stopped before Rosa and did not soften the things she had come to say.
I do not enter your record. My clade does not. We were entered once as property when the Accord let our world die, and we have not let it right us since. I stand outside it, but I stand with you where the whole Accord can see. and that is a thing it must read whether it holds my name or not.
I know what it costs you to be here.
You do not yet. You will. We held you as witness for life, and you never understood why a people who refuse to be recorded would record a human. This is why. We were keeping you for the day a human would need to be the thing two powers could meet across without either of us bending. That day is today. Use it.
And the standing Rosa had carried for 2 years, without fully understanding it, became at last the thing it had always been for. Not safety, weight. The weight of being claimed by a people the Accord could not ignore, spent now to make the Accord carry them. Tcharn came for the court, because only a court senior could ratify an instrument into the naming grammar, and because the court, the Accord's diplomatic memory, the keeper of its oldest shame, had its own reasons to want a door the Accord could not close. The Vask abandonment was the court's deepest unpaid debt. Tcharn had planted a name in a human 2 years ago, hoping a human would grow a door the court could cite. Now the human had grown the door wide enough to hold the whole frontier, and the court could ratify it and call it precedent, and the Accord's oldest failure would become the mechanism of its only courage. Rosa stood at the center of them, the court above her, the authority at one shoulder, the Vask refusing the record at the other, and did the smallest, most enormous thing the procedure asked of her. She invoked it, not with a speech. She had learned from watching all of them that speeches were what you offered when you did not have an instrument. She read the standing aloud for the record wall in the flat, precise voice she used when she was certain that she came as a party named by the court, witnessed for life by the Maroc-hold trade-clade, holding the cross-readable finding of the authority's inquiry, and that on those standings, none of which the Accord could strike, she filed the frontier commitment instrument into the court's naming grammar and asked the court to ratify it. It took 11 seconds to say. She had spent 2 years earning the right to say it. The registry floor had gone so quiet she could hear the record stock dust settling and the cold motion still crawling up the wall, and somewhere behind her, a clerk's stylus go still. The court senior folded its more than 2-meter height down to read the instrument Rosa had built, took the long composing pause that the senior tier took before anything that mattered, and when it spoke for the court, the way it always did.
The Accord moves only by consensus, and consensus has chosen, as it chose 300 years ago, to look away. The court cannot make the Accord brave. A court is not a throne. But the court named you and watched you grow a door from a courtesy, because the court could not grow it, and hoped a reckless people would. You have grown a second door. This one the Accord will walk through, telling itself it has not moved. The court will ratify it. Not because the court is brave, because the court has carried a debt to the Vask longer than your species has existed, and you have built the only instrument by which the ones we abandoned become the ones we cannot. That is the closest. Frightened thing comes to courage. A door it cannot shut, built by a hand bold enough to build it.
Renata Solheim watched it the way she watched everything, against her own certified record. And when it was done, she made a mark on her slate that she did not read aloud. The same private mark, Rosa would later learn, that she had made the night a contractor first showed her 5 strangers keeping one time. The inquiry she had refused to let die had become the grounds a galaxy stood on. She had spent a career being told her office could protect a person about as well as a paper umbrella. She had just held one open over the whole frontier, and she did not look like a woman who thought it would protect her in the slightest. And she had done it anyway. It was not a clean victory, and Rosa made sure it was not, because she had learned that the clean ones were lies. The Accord did not become brave. The makers stayed gone. The clock kept falling. Nobody was saved. Nothing was solved. The powers that had abandoned the Vask 300 years ago were exactly as cowardly the day after as the day before. What changed was only this: the door stayed open. The frontier was not abandoned. The instrument committed the Accord's resources to the edge on grounds it could not strike, and the powers walked through it telling themselves they had not moved. And the people at the edge, the station-born, the Vask roots, the contractors who kept the maker's time by hand, were not left alone in the dark. The Accord got to keep pretending it was not afraid. The frontier got to keep existing. It was the most a frightened thing could be made to do, and Rosa had made it do it. Thalim lifted the ceremonial record stylus from its throat fold. The old copper one, the mark of the naming authority that had started all of this 2 years ago in a public chamber, when it set a courtesy pin on a junior officer no one had thought to watch. The senior tier did nothing quickly. It held the stylus over the register for a long, composing pause. The pause Rosa had learned to read as the Tcharn equivalent of a held breath. And then it touched the copper to the record, once, the way it had once touched it to her collar. The instrument entered the naming grammar. On the wall, the cold blue-white of the retrenchment motion stopped climbing, hung a moment, and began, slowly, line by line, in 4 scripts at once, to warm as the record resorted itself around a standing the Accord could no longer strike. The frontier held. Reyes found her on the registry floor after, watching the record wall warm from the cold blue of the retrenchment motion to the live amber of an instrument that had just struck it dead. He had his slate, but he did not look at it. He had spent the whole series telling her that interesting was the worst thing a liaison officer could be.
I have signed every careful, tidy, small thing you ever filed,
he said.
And I have spent 2 years telling you that interesting is the worst thing you can be, because interesting gets people reposted, and I wanted you to survive this institution.
He signed the commitment order under her improvisation, the reach counter signature that made it real on the human side, and for once he did not withhold the thing he had always withheld.
I was wrong. Interesting was the only thing that was ever going to save us. Careful would have signed the retrenchment and gone home.
Rosa looked at the door she had built. The second one, the one the size of a galaxy, the one with her name on every line by choice because a procedure with her name on it was harder to disappear than a person. She understood, standing there, that the borrowing had become permanent. The court had named her as a seed, borrowed her recklessness to grow a door the Accord could not grow itself. She had spent the borrowed courage building it, and now the door was Tcharn law and load-bearing for the whole frontier, and there was no version of the rest of her life in which she was a small officer doing small work. She was going to spend it being the door she had built. The standing 2 alien powers met across. The human the Accord could not abandon because she held the people the Accord could not abandon. She had set out 2 years ago only wanting to do the job correctly. She was going to be the most interesting junior officer the Reach ever had for the rest of her life, because interesting had turned out to be the only thing that was ever going to save anyone. She put her hand to the Tcharn courtesy pin at her collar, the one whose meaning she had carried for 2 years without knowing, and found that she finally knew exactly what it meant, and that knowing did not make it lighter. It made it hers.